At 3 in the morning in Dubai, the temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. Not inside, under air conditioning. Outside, on streets made of asphalt and concrete that are still breathing the sun back into the air. This is not the heat of the day. This is the heat of the night. A fundamental law of the desert has been broken. For millennia, the logic of this landscape was simple, brutal sun, followed by profound cold. Sand does not hold the day, but a city of glass and steel does. The very fabric of modern Dubai has transformed it into a thermal battery, storing up the violence of the sun and releasing it long after sunset, erasing the single most important survival mechanism the desert ever offered. Relief. And here is the detail that tells the real story. In a landmark study of 100 global cities, published in November of 2025, a team of scientists found a critical blind spot in how we measure climate change. They discovered nighttime heat is rising dramatically faster than daytime highs. And in the specific conditions of a moist tropical environment, one city outpaced almost all others: Dubai. Its nights are warming at a rate of 1 degree Celsius every 8.81 years, a speed that is not just a statistic, it is an acceleration toward a physical limit. The strangest part of this story is not that a desert city is hot. It is what happens when the night no longer offers an escape, and the human body is subjected to a 24-hour siege of heat from which it can never recover. To understand what is happening in Dubai, you have to understand the two engines driving its heat. One is the city itself, the other is the sea it sits on. The first engine is a creation of ambition and concrete. Historically, the Arabian Peninsula was habitable because of sand's low specific heat capacity. It heats up fast under the sun and radiates that heat away just as quickly when the sun is gone. A Bedouin traveling at night would have felt a chill, a deep cold settling into the dunes. That cycle is the foundation of life in the desert. Dubai has inverted the cycle. Its built environment, the endless towers, the sprawling road networks, the sheer density of its urban core, acts as a colossal heat sink. Concrete and asphalt absorb solar radiation all day, far more efficiently than sand ever could. But unlike sand, they release it slowly, grudgingly, throughout the night. Studies have measured the effect with unnerving precision. The urban core of Dubai is on average 3.3 degrees Celsius warmer at night than the undeveloped desert that surrounds it. That is the average. In specific microclimates, between canyons of skyscrapers or above sprawling blacktop parking lots, the nocturnal temperature difference can reach a staggering 7 degrees. The city has become its own furnace. Millions of air conditioning units, the very technology that makes life here possible, compound the problem. Each one pumps hot exhaust air out into the streets, fighting the interior heat by adding to the exterior heat. It is a vicious feedback loop, an oasis that poisons its own immediate surroundings. And every year, with every new tower, that furnace burns hotter. This is the part the headlines do not capture. The second engine is the Persian Gulf. Dubai is not Riyadh. It is not a city of dry inland desert heat. It sits on the coast of one of the warmest, shallowest seas on the planet. And in the summer, as the water temperature rises, it pumps incomprehensible volumes of moisture into the air. This combination of extreme heat from the urban island and extreme humidity from the Gulf creates a condition measured by a metric far more important than simple temperature. It is called the wet bulb temperature. Now, here is the part nobody is putting on the news. Your body cools itself by sweating. The evaporation of that sweat from your skin is what draws heat away. But that process has a limit. It only works if the surrounding air is dry enough to accept the moisture. When the wet bulb temperature reaches 35 degrees Celsius, or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, the air around you is so saturated with both heat and humidity that your sweat can no longer evaporate. It just drips off. The body's primary cooling mechanism fails completely. At that point, it does not matter if you are in the shade. It does not matter if you have water to drink. your core temperature begins to rise uncontrollably. The environment is no longer drawing heat from you. You are drawing heat from it. Hyperthermia is inevitable. Within 6 hours, it is lethal. On October 26, 2015, two scientists, Professor El-Fatih El-Tahir of MIT and Professor Jeremy Powell of Loyola Marymount University, published a study in Nature Climate Change. Using high-resolution climate models, they made a dire prediction. Under the world's current trajectory of carbon emissions, the region around the Persian Gulf would begin to exceed that 35-degree wet bulb threshold by the end of the century. They described it as a specific regional hotspot where climate change would severely impact human habitability. The report made a wave of headlines. Then, the world mostly moved on. But the models were not wrong. They may have been too conservative. The future they predicted for 2100 is beginning to arrive now. Zoom out, and the data shows an undeniable acceleration. Larry Kalkstein, the chief heat science advisor at Climate Resilience for All, was the lead author of that 2025 study that identified Dubai's rapid nighttime warming. He called it a critical gap in our understanding. Before this analysis, he stated, "We did not know how rapidly nighttime heat has been rising within the most dangerous air masses. The danger is not just the peak heat of the afternoon. It is the absence of cooling at night. For the millions of outdoor laborers who build and maintain the city, this is a slow-motion crisis. The UAE government mandates a midday work ban during the hottest part of the summer, from 12:30 p.m. to 3 p.m., between June 15 and September 15. It is a necessary protection, but it assumes that workers can recover from the day's heat stress during the cooler hours of the night. That assumption is collapsing. When nighttime temperatures remain above 30 degrees and sometimes push past 37 degrees, the human body never fully enters a recovery phase. The cardiovascular system remains under constant strain. The risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke doesn't reset to zero at sundown. It accumulates. Day after day. Week after week. The city's relentless nocturnal heat becomes a chronic condition, a physiological debt that can never be repaid. The empty outdoor tourist spaces across Dubai in the summer tell their own silent story. The promenades, the waterfronts, the meticulously landscaped plazas, all designed for human enjoyment, sit deserted long after the sun goes down, radiating heat into an atmosphere that cannot carry it away. They are beautiful. And they are hostile. Then came the warning shot. The moment a statistical trend became an emergency. On May 23, 2025, the United Arab Emirates recorded its highest May temperature in history, 54 degrees Celsius. It was an astonishing figure for a month that is still technically pre-summer. But the real shock came just 24 hours later. On May 24, in an inland town called Swaihan, about 97 kilometers from the coast, the temperature gauges hit 51.6 degrees Celsius, 124.9 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a new national record for May, broken for the second consecutive day. The numbers were carried by news agencies around the world. But here is the detail that tells the real story. May 24 falls 3 weeks before the government's mandatory midday work ban kicks in on June 15. For 3 weeks, as the pre-summer heat shattered all-time records. The legal protections for outdoor workers did not exist. The climate had shifted faster than the policy designed to contain it. The event in Swaihan was not just a heat wave. It was a failure of the calendar. A signal that the established rhythms of the seasons, the very framework that has governed life in this region for centuries, are no longer reliable. The heat is arriving earlier, and it is more extreme than the system is prepared to handle. This collision of old calendars and new realities is most apparent today. July 3rd, 2026. According to Ibrahim Al-Jarwan, the chairman of the Emirates Astronomy Society, today marks the official start of Jamrat al-Kaith. The name translates to the embers of summer. It is a 40-day period, ending on August 10, that has been traditionally known for millennia as the absolute hottest, driest part of the year. A time when inland temperatures were expected to push past 45 degrees Celsius, and the dry simoom winds would blow from the desert. It was the peak, the summit of the year's heat, a period to be endured before the slow descent into autumn. But the 51 6-degree record was not set during Jamrat al-Kaith. It was set in May. The peak is no longer the peak. The entire baseline has shifted. On July 17th, 2024, at 3 in the afternoon, the instruments at Dubai International Airport recorded an air temperature of 109 degrees Fahrenheit. But combined with a dew point of 85 degrees, the heat index, the feels-like temperature, was almost unbelievable. 62.2 degrees Celsius, 144 degrees Fahrenheit. These are numbers that approach the upper limits of what human physiology can withstand, even for a short time. And they are happening in a city whose nights are now warming faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. The escape valve is gone. The implications ripple outward from the individual to the infrastructure. A city that requires constant 24-hour air conditioning becomes a fortress of cooled interiors, besieged by its own unlivable exterior. The energy demands are astronomical. The strain on the power grid during a prolonged heat wave becomes a critical point of failure. The water needed for desalination plants, which provide the city's fresh water, is sourced from the same warming Gulf that is driving the lethal humidity. Everything is connected. And everything is under a new kind of pressure. Professor El Tahir's 2015 study was a work of scientific prophecy. He wrote, "Our results expose a specific regional hotspot where climate change, in the absence of significant, is likely to severely impact human habitability in the future. That future is no longer a distant abstraction. It is the 3am weather report. It is the labor policy that has been outpaced by reality. It is the shimmering, empty plaza at midnight that should be full of life, but is instead just an extension of the day's suffocating heat. The progress that built Dubai, the monumental engineering of its skyscrapers and artificial islands, was a demonstration of humanity's power to reshape the desert to its will. But that very act of reshaping has set in motion a powerful and unintended consequence. The materials of the modern world, the concrete and the asphalt, have created a new kind of desert, one that does not cool down. The numbers themselves are stark, but they do not fully capture the profound shift. The WUA's official all-time modern high temperature stands at 52 degrees Celsius, recorded on Al Yasat Island in 2010. For years, that number was the benchmark, the absolute ceiling. But the May 2025 event in Swaihan came within zero point 0.4 degrees of breaking it, a month before the traditional summer peak even began. It suggests the old ceiling is becoming the new floor. We are watching a place on Earth approach a series of physical thresholds. The physiological threshold of the human body, defined by that 35-degree wet bulb limit. The infrastructural threshold of a power grid and water system under perpetual maximum strain. And a social threshold, where the promise of a hypermodern city collides with an environment that is actively hostile to human presence. The question is no longer if these thresholds will be crossed. It is how soon and how often. The science of the urban heat island is not new, but Dubai presents an extreme case study, a perfect storm of contributing factors. The sheer verticality of the buildings creates urban canyons that trap hot air and prevent it from circulating. The dark surfaces of roads and rooftops have a low albedo, meaning they absorb a huge percentage of incoming solar radiation instead of reflecting it. The geographical location, inside the hot box of the Persian Gulf, provides the moisture that makes the heat so much more dangerous. Each element amplifies the others. The city's design, its location, and the background warming of the planet are all pushing in the same direction. And then there is the existential question buried in the data from the Climate Resilience for All study. If a city's nights are warming at 1 degree Celsius every 8.81 years, what does that city feel like in 10 years? in 20? The rate of change is what is so alarming. It is not a slow geological process. It is happening within the span of a single generation. A child born in Dubai today will experience a fundamentally different and more dangerous climate by the time they are an adult. The historic patterns that define this land for centuries have been broken in a matter of decades. The official response from the UAE's National Center of Meteorology is one of careful monitoring and advanced forecasting. They are among the world's leaders in weather science. But forecasting a crisis is not the same as preventing it. You can warn people about a 62-degree heat index, but you cannot change the physics that create it. The adaptation strategies, more powerful air conditioning, more indoor spaces, more resilient infrastructure, are a race against an accelerating problem. It is an attempt to solve a problem of excess heat by generating even more heat as a byproduct. So 3 questions hang over the glittering skyline of Dubai tonight as the heat continues to radiate from the concrete long after midnight. How long can a society function when the very air outside becomes a threat, not just during the day, but around the clock? What does it mean for the future of urban life when a city's own success, its own growth in material substance, becomes the primary engine of its potential uninhabitability? And as the numbers from the thermometers and weather stations continue to climb, are we just watching the future of all coastal cities in a warming world, only on a faster, more urgent timeline? The heat captured by Dubai's towers yesterday is right now bleeding out into the humid air over the city. It is a slow, silent, relentless process. A transfer of energy that is invisible to the eye but can be felt on the skin. The city is not resting. It is preparing for the next sunrise, its concrete core already saturated with warmth. The desert night, the ancient promise of a cool reprieve, is gone, and in its place is just the lingering, suffocating heat of the day that never ended. To fully grasp the scale of this transformation, you must consider the sheer mass involved. The weight of concrete, steel, and asphalt in the Dubai metropolitan area is measured in the hundreds of millions of tons. Each ton is a small piece of the thermal battery. Where there was once sand, which would be cool to the touch by midnight, there is now a man-made geology that retains energy with brutal efficiency. This is not just a weather phenomenon, it is a geological one. A new stratum laid upon the earth, with new thermal laws. The physiological impact of this endless heat deserves a closer look. When the body cannot cool, a cascade of failures begins. It starts with heat exhaustion, dizziness, nausea, extreme thirst. If the exposure continues, it progresses to heat stroke. The body's internal thermostat in the brain, the hypothalamus, becomes overwhelmed and fails. Core temperature can spike to 40 degrees Celsius 104 F or higher. Proteins and enzymes in the body begin to denature, effectively cooking from the inside. This leads to cell death, organ failure, particularly in the kidneys, liver, and brain, and ultimately, death. The 35-degree wet bulb threshold is not a theoretical danger. It is a biological boundary. The work of Professor El-Tahir and Professor Powell was not a climate model. It was a mortality model. One might think that the local population, having lived in a hot climate for generations, would have some inherent adaptation. But there is no human adaptation for a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees. It is a hard limit imposed by physics and biology. Furthermore, the modern population of Dubai is largely composed of expatriates from cooler climates, and the outdoor labor force is drawn almost entirely from countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. While they come from hot regions, they are often not acclimatized to the unique combination of extreme heat and extreme humidity found on the Gulf Coast, let alone the added burden of the urban heat island. The work of Ibrahim Al-Jarwan and the Emirates Astronomy Society highlights a cultural and historical dissonance. The traditional calendar of the region was not just folklore, it was a survival guide, honed over centuries of observation. It told people when to plant, when to travel, when to expect the harsh Samum winds. and when to celebrate the relief of cooler weather. That oral and written tradition provided a predictable framework for life. The May 2025 heatwave demonstrated that this inherited knowledge is becoming obsolete. The embers of summer, a known and respected enemy, has broken its temporal boundaries. It's like finding a chapter from August torn out and pasted into the middle of May. The entire narrative of the year is being scrambled. Let's return to the mechanics of the city itself. Consider a single skyscraper. During the day, its glass facade reflects some sunlight, but it also allows a tremendous amount of solar radiation to pass through, heating the interior. The building's vac system then works furiously to pump that heat out, venting it into the surrounding streets. The concrete structure itself absorbs direct solar energy. At night, the process reverses. The building, now warmer than the cooling air, begins to radiate its stored heat outward. Multiply this effect by thousands of buildings, and you have the urban heat island. The very symbol of Dubai's modernity, the skyscraper, becomes an active participant in making the city's climate more extreme. We can track the water that disappeared into the sinkhole in the reference story about Florida. It moved at 0.87 kilometers a day, on a measurable path. But how do we track this heat? It does not flow in one direction. It is a state of being. It saturates the atmosphere. It radiates from every surface. On July 17th, 2024, when the heat index hit 62, 2 degrees Celsius, that wasn't a freak gust of wind. It was a property of the entire air mass smothering the city, a combination of heat and moisture so profound that it changed the very nature of the air itself. The policy lag is one of the most critical and under-discussed aspects of this crisis. Government regulations, by their nature, are reactive. They are based on historical data and established norms. The UAE's midday work ban, running from June 15 to September 15, was a progressive and life-saving policy when it was conceived. It was based on decades of data that showed this period was the consistent, predictable peak of summer heat. But climate change does not respect bureaucratic timelines. The 51.6-degree record in May proves that the danger zone has expanded, and as of now, the policy has not caught up. This creates a new window of vulnerability for the city's most exposed population. It is also vital to understand the structure of the Persian Gulf itself. It is a very shallow body of water, with an average depth of only 50 meters. Shallow water heats up much faster than the deep ocean. During the summer, surface temperatures in the Gulf can exceed 35 degrees Celsius 95 F. This turns the entire sea into a massive, warm bath, maximizing the amount of water that evaporates into the already hot air. Its high salinity also affects the evaporation rate. This giant natural humidity generator is right on Dubai's doorstep. The city's own man-made heat engine is then supercharged by this natural moisture engine, a devastatingly effective partnership. The contrast with the ancient desert is the poetic core of this story. Imagine standing in the deep desert, miles from any city, at 3 a.m. The air would be clear and cold. The sand beneath your feet would feel cool, having shed all of the previous day's heat. You could look up and see the stars with perfect clarity. Now, stand on a street in downtown Dubai at the same time. The air is thick, hazy, and hot. The concrete beneath your feet is still warm to the touch. The hum of a million compressors fills the air. The stars are washed out by the city's glow and the atmosphere's haze. In just a few decades, one environment has been utterly replaced by its opposite. A place of nocturnal release has become a place of nocturnal confinement. What is the endgame? Some experts talk of large-scale geoengineering solutions, reflective coatings for buildings and roads to increase the city's albedo, massive greening projects to create cooling through evapotranspiration. But these are enormous, expensive undertakings, and they may be no match for the scale of the heat being generated and trapped. The other path is one of retreat, A future where the city's outdoor life effectively ceases to exist for half the year, and life becomes a migration between air-conditioned boxes, home, car, and office. A hermetically sealed existence. The data from the Cross study is a final chilling piece of the puzzle. The fact that nighttime heat is rising 10 times faster than daytime heat under certain conditions is a paradigm shift. For decades, climate discussions have focused on the peak daytime high. But the true measure of habitability may be the nocturnal low. It is the minimum temperature, not the maximum, that determines whether a biological system, a plant, an animal, a human being, can recover from thermal stress. In Dubai, that minimum is rising relentlessly. The slow, invisible movement of the water in the Florida aquifer has a destination, Wakula Spring. But the heat accumulating in Dubai has no single destination. It is simply there. It is the new state of the system. The heat from last week is layered into the heat from yesterday, and it will be compounded by the heat of tomorrow. The city's memory is no longer in its historical archives, but in the thermal energy stored in its very foundations, waiting to be released into the night.